there is a dynamic, if you will, of our walk as disciples that is, how should I say, that we tend to push off to the side and we tend to try to forget, and that is the whole area of even persecution and discomfort, if you will, and so on. And I think it's a message that I'm hearing ringing across the church these days. And I think it's God preparing the church for what's to come. Now, that's not to be a woe is me statement, because as was shared earlier, guess what? We win. God has already won the victory, but that doesn't mean we're not going to deal with the battles. Nathaniel, well, come on up here, Nathaniel. Nathaniel is, let me tell you something about Nathaniel. Nathaniel's a deep thinker, okay? Nathaniel's a deep thinker. Is that fair enough? Okay, all right, yeah, he is. And one of the things I always have to tell Nathaniel is, Nathaniel, don't get too deep because you'll lose me, basically, all right? And so Nathaniel often comes when he first sends us a message or whatever. It is really deep, and it's really good, and it takes me sorting through some of this stuff because I know he's carrying something. And one of the things that we know that, and I just want to use this passage out of John 16:33. It says, "I have told you all this so that you will have peace of heart and mind. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but cheer up, for I have overcome the world." I have overcome the world. But I think the message that Nathaniel's carrying is this whole, all right, you two, just knock it off, all right? Is this whole dynamic of getting the church prepared and making sure that we're prepared. And so I'm going to have Nathaniel share, and then I'll come back up a little later and just share a little bit more. So, go ahead.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to sit down so it feels like a conversation and not a lecture. Just preface this. We're seeing a lot of craziness happen, you know. The whole world is seeming topsy-turvy, upside down, off-kilter. But this whole message is about, we know who's got the driving. God's got the steering wheel in his hand. You know, we all love this song, "Jesus, Take the Wheel." He's been running the show since the day one. And that's where we're going to start off. About 2 months ago, we had Dennis and Jackie over there. They talked about how consistently throughout the whole scripture, you can see the Bible is God's love story. He cherishes us as his creation, and he wants to be in relation with us. And part of loving someone is helping them. And so, in the same vein, through a parallel chord that runs throughout every lesson we learn, God shows that he is victorious over everything that we could come across. And I love how last week Andrea talked about Enoch, because I got a little bit in the front we're going to talk about that. Because hidden in one of the most boring pieces of the text, the genealogy, Adam had Seth, Seth had so-and-so, so on and so forth. It's about 6 generations, and you get to Enoch. And he only has a few sentences, but they're very important because it shows that even in the very first days of man after the fall, God was already working his method. He was giving every opportunity to rescue all of his creation from death, which, as we know, are the wages of sin. As sin came in the world, it is our due recompense to experience death. But even then, Enoch was saved. He was taken away. He did not live to death. He lived to the new life. And so, as in the beginning, Enoch was saved, the crescendo of that entire process is Christ dying on the cross, and 300 years saved one guy, one faithful servant, but one faithful sacrifice rescued all of creation. So, start with our first word. It's going to be in 1 Corinthians. The other thing about God winning is it's sometimes a little strange. Sometimes it doesn't look like it makes sense to us. So, in the first chapter, Corinthians, verse 27 and 29. Instead, God has chosen the world's foolish to shame the wise. God has chosen the world's weak to shame the strong. And we see that throughout all of these scriptures. Moses, as a babe, was saved from the slaughter of his people by Pharaoh's house, those who persecuted him. And through all of his life, he turned around and he laid waste to their authority and power and saved the Hebrew people from bondage. Joshua, that's a really fun one. Can you imagine being in that crowd, that army of Israel, walking around a city just out of reach, calling out to God, bring down our enemies? 7 times they had to walk around the city. You got to imagine Joshua's like, okay, God, I believe you can do it, but I really hope you're coming through. Boom, walls come down. You go to the passages in Judges. Gideon had a huge army, not in comparison to his foes, but he had a lot of troops. And God said, no, that's too many. See how they live and send the ones who aren't good enough home. I'm gonna beat the Midianites with 300 people. It's crazy. David, he took a rock and he felled a giant. Now, slings are pretty dangerous. You know, they're not toys, but it still takes a good shot to really mess somebody up. But that stone was guided by God's hand. This one is really crazy. The story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. He told the disciples of Baal, hey, guess what? You can pour water over my altar. Soak it 7 times. Boom, explosion, flames. And actually, in some texts, they actually say the fire actually got some of them. They couldn't get a spark. Daniel, he was tossed into the lion's den. It was a place where people were sent to die. And you know what you do with creatures like that? You don't feed them. Barely enough to survive. They would have been hungry. But Daniel came out the next day. And I talked about crescendo. Jesus, the Son of God, a piece of the triune being, became incarnated and let the creation lay waste to his physical body. That doesn't make sense. That's like me telling Gabe, hey, you want to go get the gangs off the streets? Go get beaten up and robbed by them. But that's how God works. Every person you follow, who we remember, the heroes of faith, like it talks in Hebrew, the ones who stepped out, all of their stories of triumph are done with the most confusing, off-the-wall, seemingly, incomprehensible methods. And God says that. My ways are greater than yours. And part of this reason I'm laying that out first is because the next leg, we're going to talk about a bit of a history lesson. Some of my friends and I were hobbyist historians, not formally educated, but I got a little bit of a breakdown of kind of the big epics of the past, and kind of how the enemy has been used our follies and turned good things to his ends. So the first age is the age of antiquity. We're talking before the major civilizations and through the Greek and Roman empires and all those sort of places. The answer in the age of antiquity was strength, my strength. I will lay waste to you. I will apply force, and I will defeat you that way. And you can see all throughout those ancient days, slights were not taken easily. They were punished with great prejudice. And when Shane came over and he spoke about, God's word, he talked about, even in these ancient days, God was giving everyone the alternative, how to live other than what the world does. And then as you pass on from the age of antiquity, the age of the empires, you get into the medieval age, the age of feudalism. And in that age, you had the answer was your position. This was the rise of, the lords and the serfs and the caste system in India, where you were born into a position, that was all you had. And just like strength, being strong in your convictions, being able to step forth and defend others is good. And so is a duty. A duty is good. It gives you focus and purpose, but you can serve a duty to ends that are not good. And that is what was done all in those times. It was an engine of oppression, because if you were born in one farm, you basically never left that farm. You never went anywhere else. You couldn't rise above. It was very rare. Once the feudalism, the medieval age came rolling out, then we came to the Age of Enlightenment, the Renaissance. And in that time, people were looking to learn things. They were looking to engage in material observation. That's where we get this scientific method. And there's nothing wrong with learning. There's nothing wrong with using logic and puzzling things out. But in that day, it was the end and not a means. Being knowledgeable was a badge of honor, and you could lord it over people. And that's not always the actual things that people did, but that is how they're used today. They say, the great philosophers, their teachings are, their musings are taken as clubs to bludgeon people. Then right after all these things came out, where the physical observation became its supremacy, you have the age of modernity, and that's the one we're still reeling from. Some of those. That was when the authoritarian governments rose up, and their answer was a goal: utopia. Utopia, if you don't know, the word is Latin. It is ol is not or none, and topos is place. So it's funny that they said we're going to create utopia, because the word itself means nowhere, no place. So, and you admit that it's not a thing that is possible. And, not to discourage us, we want to bring heaven down to earth, but the earth is not perfect, it's fallen, and we won't reach utopia until the new heaven and new earth, when we are taken there. And then finally, the age we are fighting is post-modernity. And this is the one that's got the most teeth, because when the Iron Curtain fell and everyone found out that the USSR was not the salvation of mankind, it was actually one of the most terrible places to live, caused misery and death, the academics in Europe, they're like, oh no, we're about to lose all our credibility. We got nothing to stand on, because it's just death and pain and misery. So they decided that they were going to attack the most important thing. They were going to say the answer is my truth. And we've been living in that these past several decades. We have people who have taught these things to the young generation, that they are their own heroes. There are the supposition of postmodern thinking is there are infinitely many ways to interpret the world, and each one is valid. Just take your pick. But that flies in the face of what we know, because not everything is equally valid, because not everything works. We know the answers. We have the book. It's a roadmap for life. But it's an easy trap, because it's a psychological thing. Our human nature can only see through our own eyes. And, if you're walking down the street and, something's out of place, you're like, oh, no. You're like looking around like, does people notice how silly I look? That's called the spotlight effect. And every time you walk around and you are subject to the gaze of others, you think that you're on stage. And, it's a fallacy, but that's how these people have taught, because they decided that their truth was what was real, but it's not. A truth that we know, truth is something that we can't change. It is a fact that exists outside of our perspective that it doesn't matter if you like it or not. So the thing that's the problem here is when you teach people that any opinion is valid, that any consideration they can make is just as important as any other. What you have today is people have so deeply ingrained certain opinions to their identity, and they're taught that if you disagree, that you are hurting them, you're attacking them. That's not the case. You don't stop bad things just to stop bad things. You stop doing bad things so you can do good things. There's a great fruit that we can live in. But that's where all these institutions, media, academia, the government, even there's some churches out there that don't live in the truth of the word. And the problem with that is that's the enemy blinding us and confusing us. We're given these conflicts that aren't real, these fights that aren't material. So we turn against each other and we don't fight the enemy, the real one, the one who even Christ says before he was given all authority on earth, he was the prince of it. But Jesus is king. But throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, we're given words that tell us how to live, what the real answer is. So we're going to start with Proverbs. Proverbs are real great. There's a lot of wisdom in there that is good to take in. And in Proverbs, they actually personify wisdom. They teach that wisdom is a virtuous woman, and you should court her. But Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about him in all your ways, and he will guide you on the right paths." So that, right there, that's, the wisdom of the old day. Be with God. Learn him. He will guide you. Then we go forward, and it's mirrored in the New Testament. Romans chapter 3, verse 23. Let me get there. A little bit more. "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified freely by his grace through redemption that is in Christ Jesus, God presented him as a propitiation through faith in his blood to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint, God passed over the sins previously committed. That's the first step, is we can get out of our own thinking. We can get out of the lies of the world. We can live in the truth that we are redeemed and we are saved. And that's God's rescue. Throughout, like I said, all these people, they're rescued from all the trials and tribulations of the world through ways that we cannot understand, that are greater than ours. In 1 Corinthians, going back there again, chapter 15, verse 56 is Paul talking, and he, in his letters, declares the promise of victory. Now the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is law, but thanks be to God who gives us victory through the Lord Christ Jesus. Therefore, my brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the Lord's work, knowing that your labor is not in vain. So, if you are in the Word and you believe these things, the answer that we come to in the question is, if we believe these things, why aren't we fighting for them? Because we know we're victorious. And I've got a little bit of a poem that was written many years ago, Englishman. His name is George Studdard Kennedy. And he was commenting on the ease with which men and the people of Christ, men and women, can turn to apathy. And in a world where the material things aren't so dear, we can get caught up in routines and comforts. So here we go. When Jesus came to Golgotha, they hanged him on a tree. They drove great nails through hands and feet and made a Calvary. They crowned him with a crown of thorns. Red were his wounds and deep, for those were crude and cruel days, and human flesh was cheap. When Jesus came to Birmingham, they simply passed him by. They would not hurt a hair of him, they only let him die. For men had grown more tender, and they would not give him pain. They just passed down the street and left him in the rain. Still Jesus cried, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And it rained in the winter rain, and it drenched him through and through. The crowds went home and left the streets without a soul to see. And Jesus crouched against a wall and cried for Calvary. I'm not trying to be castigating. I'm not accusing anyone, but it's real easy for us to walk throughout our lives and get a stirring and not act. I don't know about any of you, but I can count a lot of times where I felt like I needed to say something and I didn't. Where I felt like there was someone who needed something and I didn't step out. And so we talk today, God's a consuming fire. And that's how he showed himself to Moses, a burning bush. A fire that was warm, that was light, but did not consume. And I was given a word from a friend that I really like. Light, Jesus calls himself the way, the truth, the light. But that fire, there's two properties, light and the heat. And we're really good at being in the light. We know what's right. We do our best to not make mistakes, keep away from sin. But the problem is, in our world today, the other part of fire, the heat, the passion, that's died down. It's been stolen by the enemy because in our current day and age, the world tells you, serve your appetites. Go do what you feel like doing. Whatever you want. That's been stolen from us because we should be in that much zeal for Christ and his works. So the thing The thing is, like I talked about last time, God's not slowing down. He's getting more and more and more people every day. The church is not dead. That's an illusion. We're living in a haze where we're discouraged every day. But I want to speak from a little bit of personal experience recently. I had the chance to attend a deliverance. And who knows here that God is one who delivers. He saves us. I just talked about that all through the front, is the victory always comes even when it doesn't seem like it's going to work. I'll tell you what, hearing the cries of dozens of dark spirits being defeated and cast out, and then hearing the words of exhortation spoken over all those people, that is something that's unforgettable. And I got another bit of surprising news. We're going to have a video right here. And I'm going to preface it just a little bit. This is some scripture coming to life. In Joel 2, this is the people who were prophets before the 400 years of silence. This is like all the words they had to go on before Jesus came, before Mary was chosen. Now, let me find my place here. There's a lot of little books here in the middle, right before the Old Testament ends. Here we go. Joel 2, verse 28. After this, I will pour out my spirit on all humanity. Then your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will have dreams, and your young men will see visions. So here we go.
Yeah? What? Just tell me, what were you saying? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. You're going up? Is that what she said? Yeah? Up and up? Who's coming? I love you, honey.
You can stop that now. But that's a 2-year-old girl. And I'm going to truncate the explanation, but she's had Bible stories, but she wasn't taught about the second coming, about the return of Christ. But there, she's been given a word. The mother says she woke them up in the middle of the night and was talking about it. He's coming, he's coming. That gave me a lot of pause when I first saw that. Because we talk about the Word of God as a living word. There's some living word right there. That girl, she's young enough. There's no guile. There's no imagination there. She's speaking what she's been told, what she's seen. So if that's not a sign of the end of the beginning, I don't know what is. And it talks about we don't know the day or the hour. We're not sure how long, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100 years, whatever. But the harvest is great and the workers are few. So God's pouring out his spirit. And I know everyone's been feeling that. Before Dave left, Dave Fevig, he talked about going through the desert, about pulling strength, mounting up on wings like eagles, I think we're almost at the end of the desert, and there's a new land across the way that needs to be conquered. And we've been in a season of preparation. Christ in me, we went back to the basics for over a year. That's not getting ready for something. I don't know what is. So I'm going to call this section here preparedness. And I was encouraged to speak on some personal experience. Now, I was in the Navy for 8 years. And in the Navy, especially because you're on a ship that's cut off from all around you, you don't just get one job. I had 4 full-time jobs. I won't go through all of them because they're complicated. But besides the 4 jobs I had for my position, you're also general labor and cleaning staff. But everything you do in the military is preparation. And actually, this is something that's crazy. Our military and our allies are currently engaged in what is known as Large Area Exercise 2021. And there are units who are engaged in 17 out of the 24 time zones, all coordinating together, all talking to each other. That's crazy. But every day is preparation for if the enemy attacks. You don't want to be caught off guard because that's happened before in our history. In fact, my first duty station was in Japan, and I got to listen to some of those meetings, and I won't go into details because the stuff's still classified, but we knew why we were there. And if you know the situation in the Pacific, you might know why we were there too. But everything in the military is being vigilant, keeping your eyes open for any hint of the enemy moving. And that's what we need to be as soldiers for Christ. This part I'm going to talk is practical metaphors of the armor of God. So we start with the belt of truth. That's pretty obvious. A belt, holds stuff up. It girds your clothing, especially if you're talking about armor. It fixes it in place, locks it where it can't fall off and leave you exposed. And that's how the truth is for us. You have to know what's right so it guides everything that you do. If you don't have the truth, then all things fall off. And when I just spoke, Christ says, I'm the way, the truth, the light. That's right in the middle. It's substantive support for everything. The next piece of armor that we talk about is the breastplate of righteousness. And that covers your torso, breastplate. It protects your vital organs, your heart. But the other thing that armor does that you might not know if you haven't ever had to don any of it is it restricts your movement. It's heavy, it's stiff, so it doesn't fold to attacks. And that's what righteousness is. To live rightly, there are things that you can't do. You aren't given free range of motion to do as you will. And that's what I talked about with the world right now. It's consumed with licentiousness, which is a fancy word for do what you want. The shoes of the gospel of peace. And I'm actually wearing my boots today to help illustrate. But your boots, whether they're sandals, shoes, or greaves in a military uniform, they don't just cover your feet. Let me grab a chair here. So help everybody see. If you look there, this shoe, it goes up way past my ankle. It's almost halfway up my leg. And that's there not just as a covering, but it's as a binding support. There's all this long sleeves that I tie and I pull them tight. And that is to protect when you step poorly. All that material, if your ankle jerks, that is support to keep your feet steady. And so you don't harm your feet if you go and there's a little bit of loose stones or gravel or any sort of winding way, And that's what the peace is for us. Peace gives us confidence that we won't fall, that we won't be turned astray, that we won't lose our step. The next thing they talk about is the shield of faith. And that's another one I got a little visual aid for. So it's not the normal shield, but there's one that's been very popular in sort of the medieval Renaissance era. It was called a buckler. And it was very small, about the size of this dinner plate. But the thing is, when you use a shield, you don't just hold it up to your side. You don't just keep it in one position. You move it around. And that's what the buckler was for. And any sort of shield that is movable, if it's not a massive block of wood or steel, you move it with you. And the most important thing you move it with is when you move to strike. I'm going to illustrate this. Whenever you take a swing and you have a shield, what you do is you put the shield around your sword arm, your hand. You protect your hand so when you swing, your hand is protected if someone tries to get in there. Because if you're in a duel and you leave yourself open, the enemy you're fighting, they're going to jump in there at any vulnerability you present. So a shield doesn't just protect you from attacks, it protects you from counterattacks. And that's what our faith does. It is the assurance of things not seen. So we can step out and know that our actions, if we're walking rightly, they won't be defeated. They won't be countered because we've got our guard up. We're protecting our hand. Now, the helmet of salvation is the next piece. And once again, it's a vital protecting gear. It guards your head. But more importantly, it guards your vision. Because those eye cutouts, if you look at historical pieces of armor, the ridges that come around your face, they're raised up. And that works just like your eyebrows. It's there to keep grime and muck out. Salvation is not just protecting us, but it is focusing us. And in that same vein as the breastplate, limiting our movement, you can do it with your own hands. If you put your hands up against your eyes where that would be, you can see that in your peripheral. It's actually cutting off part of your vision. And that's what salvation is. It's our focus because you have to get people saved. Salvation is part of our goal and not just our own protection. And lastly, this is very important because we often lose this realization. When Paul calls our weapon the sword of the Spirit, that's very, very pointed. It's not an idle talk because especially back in Paul's days, you couldn't get a sword. Swords are expensive. They take a long time to make. If you're a levy from a town, you're not going to get a sword. You're going to get a pointy stick, a spear, some other kind of polearm. Because the other thing that's important about naming swords is they take a bit of work to really effectively use them. There's a lot of complicated ways to train with a sword. There's all sorts of masters who have manuscripts because they survived to tell their tales. But a spear, which is the normal rank and file weapon, there's some technique, but really the only tactic with a spear is take pointy end, stick it in the bad guy. But a sword is the weapon of the elite. A sword is the weapon of the chosen. That's everyone's hot topic now. Yeah, the chosen. But when Paul says that our sword our spirit weapon is the sword. He's claiming that we're not just so-and-so. We're elite. We're chosen. And if you go through all these things and you lay out these metaphors I've given you, what can God go do through you if you are girded in truth, guarded by righteousness, carried by peace, shielded by faith, and focused by salvation? What will the Spirit do with you? That's pretty crazy when you think about that. So, once again, I've said this over everyone before, but if you go to John 14, verse 12, this is Christ giving us part of the puzzle. He says, hold up, sorry, verse 12. I assure you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. And he will do even greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, I will do it so that the Father may be glorified through the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. It's a promise. Christ is saying, if you get right, if you live in the Spirit and the Word, if you take the truth with you, if you are righteous, if you have peace, if you have salvation, if you have my Spirit, if you have all these things right, you will work great things. It's victory. You know, we're serving a victorious God. He's already at the table enjoying the feast. It's not something that's going to happen. It's not something that we're waiting for. God's already in it. We just have to do our time on the battlefield. And so, thankfully, I didn't wander too much. Kept it brief. I'm going to close out with a song. It's one of my favorites that I came across a few years ago. And I got to preface it because as the last time I had some music, it's a little bit of that hip-hop stuff, the rap. But there's a little bit of history you need to know about this song as you view it. And you may not catch every word, but I'll give you the important ones. This man, he, in the midst of writing this song, was dealing with a terrible affliction. It's called chronic fatigue syndrome. And if you know what it is, you know it's a big deal. There are points in time where your body collapses, can't move, sometimes days at a time. And in this midst of this suffering, this song is what the man talked about. And you're going to see he's driving an old, busted, beat-up car. And he gets bottles thrown at it, paint thrown on the windshield, the tires get stabbed with a knife. And that's his story. He's making another metaphor. The car is his body, but he's inside the car. That's his spirit. And as you go through, he's declaring, we're going to make it to the finish. And it talks about run the race. Even though we're running, we're running even though we're limping. You know, there are some times where you feel like you're limping in the spirit, but we're given the strength to overcome. And you got to remember, even though we're winning, we're still in it. Until the first day of new heaven and new earth, our mission isn't done. And then, you know, the great thing is we get a new job. But when you understand that you will experience the hardships, you will experience pain, but you have victory through them, then you can live it. And so I want everyone to enjoy the lyrical musings of the artist Tripley in his song, Sweet Victory.
where my crown was. I'll be weak, but I'm alive from the dust until dawn. Yeah, I'll survive, cause I got sweet victory. Nobody can take it from me. Sweet victory, cause I got sweet victory, yeah. You see me limping, I know you see me limping. You can't tell on these CDs, well bro, I'm knee deep in it. I'm waiting in my weakness, he may be deep in it. I be lying through my teeth to say I don't resent it. Even as I write these lines, I'm close to tears. My body ain't been working right for 7 years. Miss me with that, keep your chin up, try to smile. Bro, I'm 26, I should feel better by a mile. Keep all your anecdotes and cute quotes. I'll pass on cliches for true hopes. It's too dope. I feel thorns where my crown was. I'll be weak, but I'm alive from the dust until dawn. Yeah, I'll survive, cause I got sweet victory. Nobody can take it from me. Sweet victory, cause I got sweet victory, yeah. Toast to the game, cheers to the ceiling, feeling good, we gon' make it to the finish. Yes, sweet victory, you hear me? Alley if you feel me, yeah, we still running even though we limping. Yes, sweet victory, cause we winning, yeah, you know we winning. Even though we winning, we still in it. Yes, sweet victory, cause we winning, yeah, you know we winning, now we living. Sweet victory, they see me on the stage, they like that boy the man. They hit play on them songs, they clapping in them stands. They like, I bet you got a lot of them stamps from rubber bands. So when I say it's been a half few years, they think I'm playing. But you don't know my life, boy. You don't know my life, boy. You don't know what it's been like on my wife, don't know my fight, boy. Been in them trenches, steady trying to fight my foes. And when I couldn't fight no more, he brought me low, he brought me low. I know I can't beat it low. Feel thorns where my crown was. I'll be weak, but I'm alive from the dust until dawn. Yeah, I'll survive, cause I got sweet victory. Nobody can take it from me. Sweet victory, cause I got sweet victory, yeah. Toast to the game, cheers to the ceiling, feeling good, we gon' make it to the finish. Sweet victory, you hear me? Holla if you feel me. We still running even though we're limping. Sweet victory, cause we winning, yeah, you know we winning. Even though we winning, we still in it. Sweet victory, cause we winning, yeah, you know we winning, now we living. Sweet victory, yeah. They like, I hear you talking ways, but I see your losses. You celebrating crowns, but I see your crosses. That's the paradox, it don't fit in your merit box. You might not understand it, you out in this pair of socks. The victor ain't the one that's winning, 7th inning. Trophies don't go to the ones that got a good beginning. When I say I win, I'm in this day I'm in. I mean that day, but the grace I fade out then. I'm winning cause I reign with him.
The crown of thorns declares you're king. A scarlet robe can cloak your majesty. And they nailed your hands. You nailed our death. From the cross you reign. Your kingdom knows no end. Oh Jesus, you won it all. Oh Jesus, victorious.
What an interesting depiction of our lives at times. I really appreciate what Nathaniel brought today, and I hope you understood the heart of what he's bringing too. You know, I was taken back with one of the stories you referred to was Elijah in the prophets and so on. And one of the things that God said was, how long are you going to waffle between two sides? It seems as though we see a lot of waffling these days. How long are you going to ride the fence? The interesting part of that story is that they had the prophets of Baal come and try to light a fire. And they couldn't do it. And Elijah sat there and said, maybe your God's on vacation, basically. Maybe he doesn't hear you. Maybe you need to yell a little louder. Well, then after all that was done and nothing happened, Elijah said, okay. And God told him to build a trench and fill it with water. You know what they were in the midst of? A drought. They were in the midst of a drought, and God said, fill it with water. Filled it with water, and boom, it consumed everything. You see, I say this because you know what Nathaniel's talking about in regards to preparation and so on. Are we going to take that seriously? And are we going to believe that God is still doing today what he was always been doing? And that he is a rescuer? I do want to just give opportunity. Anybody wants to share anything out of response of that, of what Nathaniel shared? Is there anybody that would like to share? Yeah, Sue. And you can't just...